Hey, it's afternoon, not morning this time around. I was feeling a little under the weather, so I didn't get up early to record. So this one isn't going to be a long video. What I wanted to check in about is if something has been coming up in awards and other writing circles where AI is becoming much more of a point of debate. This came up recently as SFWA was putting out some clarification about the Nebula Awards and how much AI they were going to allow people to use as part of that process, either nothing, and then they said you could use a little bit. Then there was a lot of debate about, generative versus research AI and what that means exactly. And some other, organizations like the Horror Writers of America are all debating this. The Romance Writers of America already have guidance out, which is a little more lenient than I expected. I can put a link in the notes to that. But what it comes down to is different philosophies about what AI means for writing, kind of almost like coding, where, people vibe code and create, maybe a workable program. But is that actually writing code? That's the question. Well, something a lot of people haven't thought about is how this affects critique groups. And while I've seen some discussions about impacts on critique groups where people have brought AI generated work, I've heard some anecdotes about critique groups where people have brought work that sure looked like AI to different members of the group. And then some people that straight up said it was AI generated and didn't really understand why that wasn't quote unquote writing. And I think more and more, like a lot of writers coming from different places, a critique group could have someone come in who maybe sees writing prompts as much of the creative process as outlining and plotting and writing a story. I could easily see that happening. Well, if that person's already, become part of the group, or maybe they were part of the group and then they want to look into this, what is that going to do? I think more and more groups will need to have, they should already have guidelines. They should already have rules in place and how they're going to operate and what happens if somebody acts out, because inevitably somebody acts out. I've been in some groups with some really excellent drama. But I think being upfront about that is going to be more and more important, especially if, the thing is, it's hard to accuse a person of using AI, and then how are you really going to prove that unless it's just blatantly bad? So being upfront about the fact that your group does not allow AI work, where the line is on AI work, generative AI versus research AI, and then also, are people allowed to upload stories for critique to AI? Because that has also become a thing. If you don't want your work anywhere near an AI or becoming part of an AI data set, then handing it off to someone to read, I think that needs to be explicit as far as what they do with it. There's a lot of trust involved there. So that there's a question of some spell checking programs and editing programs that are increasingly using more and more AI in the process. Microsoft, or now they just want to call Office Copilot, is inserting more and more AI into the writing and creating process, where a person might not even ask for it, but it's auto-completing as they write. And unless they take active steps to turn all that off, AI is going to be an integral part of that creative process. So that's a lot of changes. And it's something that your writers group needs to engage with and talk about before it kind of blows up. Because if there's anything about writers groups that I've seen in the past, if there is drama and conflict, just like any group of friends or relationship, if there's no guidelines on how to deal with that conflict, it could blow up the whole group. And this is a thing that is changing all the time. So having some kind of dialogue about it, I think, is is important, especially as we just start seeing AI in more and more places. So that was my thought for today. I'm still going to be watching where these different awards end up, where the line is. Like, I keep seeing more interesting things about how people are using AI versus not using AI. And even for myself, like, I feel, they talk about having a second brain that is doing things for you, and having an agent out there that is like performing tasks for you, or that to me feels like it's taking away a lot of my capabilities. but then I also think, am I getting old? Is my frame of reference around this like outdated? And as a science fiction writer, shouldn't I be figuring out the ways that people are changing and evolving and adapting to this new technology? It sometimes feels like writing about electricity with a quill pen, or writing about printing presses with a quill pen. Maybe that's a better analogy. But we're in a world of so much change that we just have to do our best to stay ahead of it. Because if anything, it's going to find a way to put wedges between people, and this is a real writer and this is a fake writer, or this is a real story. And it makes sense, because if you're a person who has put a lot of effort and time into being able to write stories, then you sort of don't want somebody coming along and auto-generating that. We're all going to become craftspeople, right? And there is absolutely a lot of value in that. I think that's where I would want to be. That's really the thing that for me has more value, as opposed to something that gets spit out. But I'm also not, I'm not a 16-year-old who's learning to love science fiction for the first time, and the story that they love the most, that impacts them the most, happened to have been written potentially by an AI. And I think that day could come. Maybe it won't be a matter of like a singular story, but it'll be a matter of 20 stories they read, and they pick out things from among those 20 that were generated by an AI, and that becomes the thing that affects them. I could see that being very likely. So anyway, something to think about. If your writers group has not talked about it and it's not in your guidelines, I would take a look at that. All right, I'll see you later.